What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and today we're going to be talking about expanding your creativity and in comics and animation and whatever you can even think of and beyond. And today, to talk about that specifically, I have a new guest here, Mr. Brannon. And let's see, I'm trying to get the thing back up. All right, here we go. What's up, Brandon? How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, Marshall? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, anytime, man. Thanks for hitting me up because I think looking at your stuff, I think it's going to be a good one. It's interesting.
Thank you.
So let people know a little bit about who you are and where they can find you.
All right. Well, that's kind of a loaded question, Marshall. So I've got a long and sordid past, but so my name is Brannon Hollingsworth, and I am the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, and the Chief Creative Officer for a little animation production studio called Brainy Pixel. And you can find us at brainypixel.com. And we are a Christian animation studio and Christian production studio, but don't let that scare you away because we still make really cool stuff. Kind of our motto is we start with awesome story, we layer on amazing visuals, and we give all the glory to God. So the first thing that we do is we always start with great story and amazing imagery. And I hope that proves true for all the products that we create, whether they're animation or whether they're comics or novels or video games or whatever that we're producing. And we've got lots of fingers currently in lots of pies. And I also have a long and sordid history as well that I'm more than welcome to talk about if you want to delve into the past. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah, let's get into all the dirty, dark secrets.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Cool. And, I don't know. A lot of the people in my audience, they're certainly creative people generally.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I find that like attracts like, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I talk about my faith on this channel, and a lot of some of us here are Christians, some of us aren't, some of us are, and I think I like the mix. So
yeah, it's totally cool. And I recently another thing that I'm into is I'm about to start podcasting, so I'll be reaching out to you to come on my show.
Sweet.
But I just landed a gig with Theophany Media to be their anchor host for a podcast. It's going to have several hosts, and we're going to rotate through. But one of the questions on the kind of form you had to fill out to become a host was, what makes art Christian? And my answer is art can't be Christian, because Jesus didn't die for art. He came and died for people, and Christian, the word Christian means little Christ, and so only people can be Christian. So art really is boiled down to, ultimately, what are you trying to say and who are you trying to glorify? You can glorify anything with art. And so our take on it is we're going to glorify God with what we do. And that doesn't mean we're not going to have, like in the case of Tenet's Tales, which hopefully we'll be looking at later, that means we're not necessarily not going to have monsters or, maybe violence or evil. Those things will be depicted because those things are real, in at least in the spiritual sense. For monsters, obviously. I wish monsters were real, but they're not. But we depict those things, but we do it in a way that it doesn't glorify those things, right? It's always the good guys are going to win in the end with all of our stuff. So,
Interesting. Well, I like your answer to that question, and what about art being Christian or not Christian? That's really an interesting take, and definitely, I haven't quite thought of it that way, but I definitely can get down with that.
Cool.
So, let's see. You spoke about Tenet Tales. So, there's a couple things. First of all, you sent me a link to an ash can. Did you want me to share that link, or you want me to share the website link?
You can share whatever you want to, Marshall. I'm here to promote what we're doing. So if you want to show the ash can, show it. If you just want to show the website, that's fine too.
All right. Well,
I'm more than happy to talk about all of it. And if you've got any listeners out there that want a free copy, I'm more than happy to to give them a free copy as well. So we want to spread the word about what we're doing.
Oh, well, that's what I was kind of asking, like the link to the Dropbox thing, or do
Mhm.
you want to do that yourself and I'll just share the website?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I can share the
Okay,
link to the Dropbox, or I can create like a coupon code through Gumroad and give people free downloads with that.
cool.
So,
So, I will say, the preview or the Ashcan
mhm.
that was sent to me, I did read it.
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, art wise, it's just beautiful. Like it's
thank you.
amazing, for sure.
Thank you.
And the story is definitely interesting. It's
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of Christians and non-Christians take on similar subject matter,
Mhm.
and it's always interesting. Everybody's got a very different take, no matter, and it almost doesn't even matter if they're Christian or not. It's always something I wouldn't have necessarily thought,
Mhm. Right.
dealing with angels or fallen angels.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
guess, let's talk a little bit about that
Sure.
story and where you're coming
Sure.
from with that.
Sure. Yeah, Tenet's Tales is actually my passion project. So every artist has one, and I have been working on this particular project. Um, I've always had it running in the back of my mind and been working on it to some degree for the last decade and a half. So there's a tremendous amount of backstory and world that's been developed in what I call the Weird War universe. And the Weird War universe is essentially saying that the spiritual realm that we read about in Scripture is real, and
Mm,
there are angels and there are fallen angels. But what if, when angels fell, if they still had their free will? Right? I mean, obviously, angels had to have their free will in order to choose to follow Lucifer. And what if they still had that free will after they fell? There's nothing to say they don't. And and if that's the case, then there may be some angels that said, you know what, this is a rotten deal. I followed this guy and he was a shyster, and I don't like the outcome. So I want to do my own thing now. So that little minor tweak to kind of what exists out there in Scripture opens up a whole world of possibilities, at least in my mind, for exploring stories. And so, if you have fallen angels now with free will, you may have some that choose to be evil, like demons and devils. You may have some that choose to be neutral and not follow heaven or hell, not align themselves with either. And then you may also choose to have some that say, you know what, I want to be as good as I can be. I know I'm fallen, but I still want to help mankind. I still want to do good things. And that's the case of our hero Tenet, who's essentially a fallen angel, and he cannot lie, and he seeks to right an ancient wrong that he's done the only way he knows how, and that's by defending mankind from all the forces of reality that are arrayed against him. And so he's now outcast from heaven. He's now hated by hell, and he's a little bit nuts, and he's immortal, and he takes on enemies from all sides to protect man. So he sometimes fights the hosts of heaven because he's technically fallen, and he sometimes fights the hordes of hell because they don't like him, because he's what they call the betrayer. And so he's kind of an everyman hero, really. He's got some powers, he's got some stuff that he can do, but pretty much he's kind of like us. He has to choose what he wants to do. Does he want to do good or bad today? And does he want to help people or hurt people? Because he's got this fallen nature, but he's ultimately he was an angel, and he knows good and he knows right and wrong. And so that's kind of the basis of the story.
hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because you know, I just it's funny because being a critic coming from a specifically Christian perspective,
Mhm.
it's surprising to see you take that a hero create a hero out of a fallen angel.
Sure.
And this isn't like me saying a thing of judgment. I just think it's
Yeah.
really it's almost like if an angel is human or something.
hmm hmm Yeah. I mean, all we're really supposing here is if we're saying free will continue to exist in those beings after the fall. It's clear that angels had free will because they had to choose to do wrong And I'm just saying, hey, they still have free will. And so the natural logical outcome is you may actually have some guys, just like people. You have people, and we're fallen, because of Adam's choice, and Eve's choice in the garden. And we choose to do right, and sometimes we choose to do wrong, and there are ramifications as a result. And I've just kind of taken that logical step to, kind of an ultimate conclusion. And so now there are entities that exist, and entire nations and organizations that exist where you may have now neutral fallen that can give rise to things like a Bigfoot-like creature. Some creature that exists out in nature, and it wants no part in the weird war. It wants no part in the battle between good and evil. This cosmic battle. It just wants to be out in nature and do its thing. And it's supernatural, right? Because it was once an angel. It's got supernatural powers, but it's stepped away from the conflict and says, no, I just want to exist in nature and be at one with nature. And so it gives rise to the ability to tell stories using creatures with supernatural powers and not necessarily contradicting what's in the Bible. So I'm filling in the gray spaces in between the lines.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever heard of Brian Godawa?
Nope,
No.
I haven't.
It's interesting. He's a director from Hollywood, and he's also a Christian. And he talks about he has some YouTube videos and stuff, and he's written several books about the Nephilim and kind of the in between stories of the biblical stories that we have, but kind of reading in between those stories where the Nephilim might have played a part. And it's really interesting. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of what you're saying with this.
The Nephilim are a great example, and there are organizations within the Weird War and the Tenet's Tales universe that the Nephilim show up, and they're major players. There's actually the organization called the Brotherhood of Belial, and it's kind of a nation of outcasts. All these pseudo mythological creatures that are really just fallen of some variation or another, but now they're actually trying to augment their bodies with technology and with gene splicing, and so you can get into now combining spiritual powers with technology, and how does that affect the world, and how does that impact the stories? So there's lots of fun you can have with this stuff. But like I said, I could talk about it all night long. So
yeah, it sounds cool. So now with Tenet Tales, you it looks like from the website that is there multiple titles, or are those just prints, or what are those? There's like
those are. So I actually, I always envisioned Tenet's Tales as being a graphic novel. In my mind, it was always essentially kind of like a Christian Hellboy, right? Where you have essentially for lack of a better term, a hero or maybe a paranormal type investigator who shows up, and there's a bad guy that's of supernatural origin, and he's threatening some sort of, humankind, and Tenet goes into action figuring out how to defeat this creature by whatever means. And I always kind of thought of it in panels and in art, with text on the page. But as you well know, and can espouse to, making your own comics is tough, and so it can be tough, and it can be expensive if you want a certain quality. And so for a long time, it was kind of out of my reach to be able to do it that way. But I had all these stories in my head that I wanted to tell, and so I'm an author. I've always written since I was in the 5th grade. And so I just started writing short stories and novellas about Tenet. And so that's what you were seeing on the webpage there are several novellas that are published out there. The Truth is out there, Ambush, Cold Vengeance, and there are several others that are going to be published soon. But there are several stories out there you can go download on Amazon now. They're really cheap, and you can go get them. And it's the same story, it's the same hero, it's just a different presentation. It's no art, it's just text. And so, but I think you actually get a little bit of a deeper look inside of Tenet's character that way. One of the things I regret about the Ash Can is that it's only 7 pages of story, and cost was a big factor. I want to tell longer stories with Tenet, but it's just, there's can be cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
But I wanted to tell a solid story that tells you a little bit about Tenet and hints to things in the world, but doesn't give too much away right off the bat. So, and there are more coming.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So have you ever thought of crowdfunding the project?
Yes, I have. And all of the research that I've found really says you need to really have a pretty solid fan base, before you start trying to build a fan base with a crowdfunding campaign. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the mode that I'm in currently, is
Yeah.
trying to build a solid fan base. And it's hard to build a solid fan base and get people excited about something they haven't seen, which then is why I did the little 7-page ash can. And I really wanted that to be longer, but it was just a function of, I was paying for that in my back pocket. So
Yeah, trust me, I know. It's expensive, and you want to hire good talent to make it look really good, which you definitely did that. And I'm sure it didn't, it wasn't cheap.
Right.
It's never cheap to make comics, even if it's just your time that you're investing.
Yeah, it's not bad for me necessarily on the writing side, because I'm a really fast writer, and it's a story that I'm passionate about, so it even increases the speed that way. But there's a lot of subtleties in terms of art direction, when you're working with an artist. And Mingo Fedorov, the artist that I use for this ash can, is actually Russian, and so there's even a language barrier there that we have to kind of. And so you really have to distill that art direction down to its most bare essence. And he speaks way better English than I speak Russian, hands down. But there's still a bit of a language barrier there. But I've tried several times with several different artists to create Tenet's Tales comics. But Mingo gets Tenet. He understands Tenet, and it really shows on the page. And I could actually show you some earlier attempts with other artists that didn't quite translate well, but they were good, but they just weren't what I was looking for. They didn't have that kind of Hellboy type vibe that I was going for.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because as I was, reading it, it's funny because I thought that same thought, which is weird because it's a very small story, but as I was reading it, I'm like thinking, like, how did he tell the guy to do it that way?
Right.
Like, and it come out like it looks like what you probably imagined as the writer. Like,
it really does.
I don't know how I know that, but for some reason I'm like, you can't just say, have him throw a staff in his eye and have it look like that. There's more to it. Like,
yeah, a lot of that is credit to Mingo, right? He gets Tenet, he understands what I'm trying to do, and he's really gotten it from the get-go. And he is such a talented artist. I mean, he's just amazing. Part of that is because I've done a lot of art direction. So in my past, in my sordid past, one of the things I did a long time ago is I was actually an art director for some RPGs or some role-playing games. Several companies that came out in the D20 boom, which is the open source gaming movement that came out before 3.5 and 4.0 and all the stuff that's out now. There was a span of time for about 3 or 4 years where there was something called the OGL, or the Open Gaming License, that Wizards of the Coast put out. And there was lots of little companies that sprung up, like Paizo was once a really small company. It wasn't the juggernaut that it is now. Or Green Ronin. And I did work for those guys. And I was actually an art director at Bastion Press for a couple of years, and learned the craft of communicating with artists. And I think very visually, I think very cinematically already. And so I kind of have a talent there, I think a bit of a gift. And so I was able to lend myself to that work really readily and easily, and really enjoyed it. And then later on, I actually co-created an RPG from scratch and did all the art direction for that game. And that was literally thousands of pieces of art that I art directed over the span of about 5 years. And so that was a lot of practice, art directing. And so when you do it for a certain amount of time, and you do it with artists from all over the globe, like I did, I had artists from Israel and from the Philippines and from Taiwan and from Russia and from Mexico and South America. So almost every globe or every continent on the globe, I had artists working for me. And you learn a lot in a short amount of time. So,
Wow. I guess, so I wanted to talk about expanding your creativity because I've
mhm,
seen you've done so many things.
absolutely.
Speaking about art direction, just to kind of continue with where you were at with that, because
Mhm.
I have some curiosity there. Not that I ever want to be an art director, but um, I am creating my own properties, and I do have to do art direction
Mhm.
anyways. So,
Yeah.
but as far as like for a company, I mean,
Mhm.
um, but I think there's a lot of people in my audience who are writers, or they might want somebody to do the art for one of their books or something like that.
Mhm.
Do you have any, from your experience, do you have
Sure.
any tips,
Yeah.
of maybe how to do it pretty faithfully to what the intended vision is?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, you have to have a clear vision, right?
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do is be an art director and not really know what you want. That's
Hmm.
really a recipe for disaster. So, number one, you got to know what you want. Number two, when you find your artist, you have to ensure that that artist can deliver in terms of style or mood or feeling that you want. I mean,
Mm.
you go on any art site, ArtStation, DeviantArt, Instagram, wherever, and you can tell certain artists kind of tend to lean towards a certain style or styles. So for A Tenant's Tale, for instance, where I wanted a really dark, kind of gritty, a little bit scary, but not too scary style, I wasn't going for horror, right? But I was going for a little bit, maybe half a notch back here, away from
Mhm.
horror, getting close. Um, you're not going to go find somebody who's doing My Little Pony art, to do that work. That's just
Right.
going to be a non-start from the get-go. They're not going to understand where you want to go and where you want to take it. So one, you have to have a clear vision. Two, you got to find an artist, and then in three and four, I think would be where you develop a really strong pitch. Your pitch has to be very concise, and if you can distill the concept, the overall concept of what you're trying to deliver to the customer in 1 or 2 pages, then that's money, right? Because you can send that 1 pager or that 2 pager over to your artist, and usually they can kind of absorb that and get an idea, and then maybe you get some early sketches back to make sure they're hitting the numbers where you want to be. Um, then when you get ready to do the specific art direction, so that's kind of general, you make sure they understand the world and the characters. um, when you have to write that specific art direction, and let me step back for a moment. I'm assuming there's no art that's been done yet, so you're starting from ground zero. You have no concept art already. So once you begin writing that specific art direction, keep it simple. Don't overload an artist with details unless they ask you for them. Most artists tend to want the bare amount of details to get the idea across of what they're going to depict, and then let them fill in the details. And that's probably number six, is let the artist do what they love,
Mm.
right? That one tip. If you don't take anything else away from this discussion in terms of art direction, that's it. Find an artist who does really well what you want them to, and then unleash them.
Mm.
Don't try and micromanage them. I've had artists come back and say, "Hey," like for instance on the game that I mentioned, they come back and said, "Hey, kind of what style do you want this rendering in? What level do you want it to be?" And I'm like, "You do what makes you happy." Because when that artist is happy and they're enjoying that work, it
Mhm.
translates, man. It comes through the page, and you feel it and you see it.
Mhm.
And so you just empower those artists to do what they love, and oh man, you're going to get 200% better art. So,
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That definitely resonates as an artist. I've heard a lot of commentary about that, and I think there are some artists who actually rather be told what to do, but
mhm,
for the most part, I think that a lot of artists, if you can give them, let the leash out, and
yep,
let them do what they do
absolutely.
best, that's where you're gonna get,
Yeah,
the best
because that's
work.
why you hired them. You hired them
Yeah.
because they're a talented professional that does exactly what you want them to do. So why would you
Right.
micromanage them? Let them loose, let them have fun. And what I found 9 times out of 10, Marshall, is when I do that, not only do I get much better work, I get really cool stuff that I wouldn't have even thought of. Little details in the
Mm.
piece that are 100 times better than anything I could have come up with. Every once in a while, I would say maybe, one time out of 500, you might get something that contradicts something that's in your pitch, right? That's like, hey, oh no, I wanted him to have a battle axe instead of a sword or something like that. But those are easy fixes, but a sword, a battle axe looks really good on him. So maybe I'm going to change the pitch. Maybe he needs a battle axe instead of a sword or whatever. So yeah, I would say the biggest thing is empower your artist.
All right. Awesome. So, do you, outside of the art of your writing, do you have you done any art before, or are you just mostly
me personally?
writer? Yeah.
So, when I was in high school, I did art, and I really enjoyed doing art. And I, drew a lot and had a sketchbook, and took some art classes. But I never really took it much farther than that. I would love to pick it back up someday, but I'm so far out of practice. I bet I couldn't even draw a stick figure right now. So, but I have a good sense of composition. Yeah. I understand color and color theory, and I understand a lot of the technical aspects of art. And I do a lot of graphic art in terms of working in Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator. So, those technical aspects, I really get those a lot. I did all the lettering and all the effects and everything for the most part on Troublemaker, the Tenant's Tales. There was some of the stuff that Mingo did, but most of that I did, and I did all the lettering. So I get a lot of that, and so a lot of that's kind of institutional knowledge that I can draw from, and I can also speak talk the talk when I'm talking to an artist. So I understand when they're telling me something about, I don't know, color saturation or something like that on this particular panel is not working, or it needs to be a cooler panel as opposed to a hot panel or something like that, or a warm panel. Then I understand some of that stuff. But yeah, sadly, all of my art is still back in high school. I need to go back and get it.
Yeah. No, it's obvious that you have, a sense for it, though, that's different than a typical writer, because, I just, as I'm looking at like these images and things, like there's just details, and they're not, that you could tell they're visually oriented. Like, right. I don't know, like you imagined them, and I'm seeing like teeth in the neck of like characters and like different moods, and there's like there's one of I'm assuming is like a mech angel and like this crazy axe, and like I'm like, holy crap, like this stuff is really cool. Like
thank you. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that is, there are several people who have fed into this Weird War universe. I've got a couple of co-authors that write in the same universe. And I actually, my kids grew up role playing because, I was a gamer and still am a gamer, but I just don't really have a lot of time to do it anymore. But I actually created a Tenant's Tales game, a campaign setting, if you will, and so friends and my kids grew up in that world, because as we gamed, and we told those collaborative stories, as you do when you role play, it added to the depth of the world. And so that angel character you're looking at, he was one of my son's characters. His name was Argus in the game that we played, and they're like defender knights essentially on the shield wall of heaven. So they're all armored out and they're really cool. So it's a whole series of there's a whole organization of these shield angels that guard the walls of heaven. It's really cool. So
yeah, it really is. And I immediately, thought of like, it's gotta be like an angel, like exactly what you said, and it's just like, it's just cool because you think of these things and what I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to explain, but when I think of heaven almost and maybe what an army from heaven would be like that really reflects what it could be like.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of that is with anything that I'm creating, I try not to contradict scripture. That's like one of my number one mandates. But I'm all about filling in those gray areas, between the lines. And so that's the area I get to play in. And a lot of that is kind of like when you read The Lord of the Rings for the first time, or when you read The Hobbit for the first time. The Hobbit was a culmination of years and years and years of work on the part of Professor Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he worked on this stuff in the back of his brain all the time, and he was problem solving, and he was creating, and he was layering, you know, time and civilization and culture. And I've kind of had that, not to the level of Tolkien by any means, but I've kind of had that blessing to kind of slowly develop this world over the past 15 years. And it is, you feel a lot of that layering and that complexity, and you feel a lot of that veracity, and it feels like a real world, or these characters are stepping out of a real world, because it's not just, you know, oh, I thought of it yesterday. You know, it's something I've thought about and changed and tweaked, and I've actually asked people, hey, you know, does this line up with scripture, or would this contradict scripture, or, you know, would this even work? You know, is it a cool idea? Is it stupid? You know, and I'm more than happy to get feedback and change things if needed. So
yeah, looking at this imagery, I'm thinking, and hearing what you're saying, I definitely hope that that you're able to make it come to life, because I think it's pretty cool.
oh, me too, Marshall. Me too. I want to grow Tenant's Tales so much. I mean, you know how it's again, it's analogous to, you know, what Mignola has done with Hellboy. You know, you got Hellboy and the BPRD, and, you know, you got Frankenstein Underground, and, you know, you got Baltimore. You know, you got all these layers of this universe where all these characters play, and Tenant's Tales and the Weird War is very much like that. On my Amazon profile, almost, I would say probably 80% of the books and the novels that I've written are all in the same universe, but you would never know it necessarily when you initially read them. You know, I released a book last Christmas called Silent Night, Lady White, about this occult hunter called Walter W. Winans, who's hunting a ghost. And he's actually based on a real man in history who's a crazy guy. I mean, just amazing guy. But I turned him into an occult ghost hunter. And that's in the same universe with Tenet, you know, and they're going to run into each other at some point in the future, you know. So yeah, it's just the layers. You can feel those layers and that veracity. And I think it's because of all the work that's gone in, all the work and the love and the study that's gone into it.
Awesome. I just want to acknowledge the people in the chat. Thank you for hanging out with us. I see a lot of you in there. I've been reading the comments. We do have a question, which I was curious about as well. The R2D2 for Life, is there a print version for Tenet's Tales, Ashcan, or just digital?
And I think this is Sean. I think this is a guy that a great guy who follows us on Twitter, where we're at Brainy Pixel, by the way. And he won a poster of a Tenet's Tale cover not too long ago as a follower. And that's still going on, by the way. So for every 100 followers that we're going to get, or hopefully that we get in the month of October, we're going to draw one person to get an 18 by 24 poster of a Tenet's Tale cover. But to answer R2D2 for Life's question, currently, no, there's not a print version of the Tenet Tales Ashcan. It's just digital, but we're looking into that. So we definitely want to do that. The problem with the Ashcan, and we've even talked to some indie publishers as well that are interested in Tenet's Tales. The problem with Troublemaker specifically is it's only like, I think it's 9 pages, you know, so it's going to be tough to print that and it be anything substantial. So probably what will happen is we're going to couple that with another larger comic, or, you know, even a different comic, like maybe, you know, Demon Hunter Raven or something like that, and, you know, tack it on to that as a, you know, a special add-on. Or as soon as we can get a Tenet's Tale full episode written, a 24 or 32 page or 36 page book, we'll throw it in there as well. So I think it would be, I don't think anybody would enjoy paying for and getting a 9-page comic. Honestly, I think I'd feel kind of cheated if that were me.
Mm-hmm. So you're friends with Nick Mueller then, I guess, huh?
So we have connected over Twitter, and yes, he's a great guy. I'm super excited about Demon Hunter, and we're actually in the early talks about maybe doing a crossover with Tenet and Demon Hunter, and I think that would be a super lot of fun. So looking forward to finding out more about that in a week or two.
That's cool. That would be really cool. I'm looking forward to reading Demon Hunter Raven.
Mm-hmm.
So this, what was I going to say now? thinking about the Tenant's Tale. Crap. What? Oh, and then the print. Oh, yeah, that's right. The publishing. Just a thought. Are you familiar with Alterna Comics or?
Alterna, you said?
Yeah,
No, I'm not.
these guys right here.
Ah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about them.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. They started out years ago. It's Peter Simeti. He started out years ago, creating his own comics and stuff, as a lot of people did. And he's kind of built it throughout the years. He was selling graphic novels and things like that. And I think 3 or so years ago, he started the actually printing comics on newsprint, like the old school days, like
Cool.
all the comics that he has that
Right.
he sells it's just like, stepping right back into the 90s, 80s, 70s.
Right.
And it just looks exactly like that. And
Cool.
it's just really, really fun. And that's how I actually would rather print comics personally. But he's got a lot of different things to help other creators. He's got a printer partnership program where you can actually kind of piggyback on his print runs and,
Oh, cool.
and print your own comics. Or he also takes submissions. But one thing I'm thinking of, and if if it were to pass through, like your story, I feel like would work perfectly for his anthology series he puts out. It came out on a Wednesday, and again, 7 pages. Yeah, it might be short, but you can get it in there, and it's totally creator owned. He doesn't take any rights or anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would love to.
I don't know. It might be an option for you to.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to those guys. So if you can put me in contact with them, or do an email intro or a Twitter intro or whatever works these days. I would.
I'll send you a
love
link
to talk to them
for sure.
That would be awesome. That would be super cool. I'm open to anything like that. Again, my goal is to get it out there so people can read it. And I'd love to make a little money on it. But if I lose money, then okay, that's fine. I'm more passionate about the story and about people learning the truths that are embedded in all of my stories. And it's not preaching. I don't think the Troublemaker. I don't think that was preachy. I think one of the things I really try and do is I'm a fan of M. Night Shyamalan and the way he kind of has a left turn in almost all of his movies. I want that moment in all of my stories where something happens that you don't expect and the story kind of pivots 180 degrees. And it's like, oh, whoa, I'm reading this kind of story now. I thought I was reading that, but now I'm reading this. Yeah. And so I strive to have that in my stories. And so I try not to be preachy, but I do try, and glorify God. And I try to have the truth. Awesome. in my tales. So
yeah, that's awesome. And I haven't actually, it's interesting, the approach of my faith within creativity. For a long time I was making hip-hop music. I always wanted to make comics, but I kind of veered into this world of trying to make hip-hop music back in the days. I still do it, but it's not a focus. But that was just totally just all about God and pretty preachy, sort of. Well, not always preachy, but it always had some of the faith stuff in it. It was a little more explicit in that way. But as I've been back to making comics and focused on that, it's funny, I haven't even. I really I mean, in some of my writing and things that haven't come out yet, there's some of that, but I really haven't injected that part of myself to the creativity. But I think part of it is I'm just trying to learn how to make these comics, and stuff, and learn how to create stories and art. There's a lot to learn, and I'm just like, but yeah, I'm in some of the writing I've been doing lately, I'm trying to kind of inject it in a way that's organic, natural, that just is. I think what I do is actually Stan Lee said something. He said that he tried to put like morality tales into his stories, but it was things that most people agree with. It wasn't anything like super controversial. Now, I'm not saying that I'm afraid to push boundaries, because I'm not. I actually like stuff that has a little bit of an edge in that way to it. But it's just there is kind of an approach where you can. It's almost like this idea of let's discuss this
Yeah.
instead of let me tell you this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and that's really what all stories are. The basic source of conflict in every story is, character A believes this and character B doesn't. Whatever that is, it's character A believes, oh, I'm going to break in your house and I'm going to hack you up in little pieces, right? And character B says, no, you're not, right? There you go. So that's the source of all conflict, is that we don't agree about something to some level, right? We could be just we're across the room and we just don't agree about what we're going to order tonight, or it can be, aliens are invading the planet and we don't want them to take us away. So so it's
Totally.
whatever level you want to take that to. And so
Yeah.
you can't run away from conflict, or you don't have story. So just that easy.
Totally. That's a good point. So as far as like this idea of expanding your creativity, it's pretty cool. I think people who are writers really have a cool opportunity to do that, especially almost uniquely. And it's pretty neat that I don't know. I guess I'm curious for you to delve in a little bit to some of the other things you've done. I
Sure.
see, Blender tutorials on your YouTube channel. I see animation
Right.
and some other things, and I don't really know. I
Okay.
haven't been able to check out exactly what
Sure.
all it is. So yeah, let us
Yeah.
know a little bit about some of the other things you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for me, writing has always been that path into whatever, type of creativity is going on. I got my start, as I said. Well, I guess my non-paid start is I wrote a short story in the 5th grade, and that's kind of what got me hooked. And I decided I want to be a writer when I grew up. Although going to college, I learned pretty quickly that writing code pays a lot more than writing poetry. And so I had to get a job in the IT space to pay the bills and, pay my tuition and whatnot. And so I worked in the IT space for, 30 years, something long time.
Oh wow.
But I've always been creative on the side. I've always had something that I'm working on, or projects that I'm developing, or like Tenant's Tales that I'm always running, for the last decade and a half. But there's always been something, going back to role playing or whatever. I got started. I was first published in the role playing industry, where I won a contest. I wrote an adventure. It's the first adventure I ever wrote, but I wrote an adventure for essentially a D&D type game, and won the contest, and that got me into a book, and then that led to a paid job to write a source book for that same company, and so I got to develop a world, or help develop a world, and that was really exciting because world building is one of the things I really enjoy doing. And that then segued into a little bit of a stint in the RPG industry, where I worked for lots of different companies as a freelance writer, game designer. Was in Dragon Magazine a couple times, and that then led to having a novel published through a gaming company. To kind of jump from game writing into fiction, which is not super different, but it's pretty close. There's some mechanics in game writing that isn't in fiction. But my passion is really creating worlds and writing stories. And so once I got into that fiction space, I really started just kind of rolling that snowball. And Brainy Pixel is the animation company that I'm a co-owner of, and I'm our primary writer for everything that we do. So all the worlds and stuff that we're currently developing. We've got a robot feature film in the works, and I'm the primary script writer and world generator on that. If you look at the more in the drop down, we've got several shows out there that we're currently out there working. Cubekins is like a 4 to 7 year old kind of a VeggieTales meets Mayberry kind of show, and I'm our primary writer on that as well, and the kind of guy that came up with the idea for the world. My business partner came up with the character ideas, the initial ideas, and I developed them from there. And we are really close to finishing the production on a 22-minute short on this particular show that we've already got a distribution deal that we're about to sign with a major Christian distributor. And we're going to put this guy out for the public to consume and hopefully the goal is to get a producer on board to help us produce more episodes. We want to produce as many as we can, obviously, but probably 6 11-minute episodes. But all the writing you see here is my work, and I came up with all these different characters, and again, communicated with the artist to come up with art direction. This is a pretty exciting project because we're using motion capture on this project and face capture to help streamline the animation process. And so that really helps us go quickly from script to, getting in and polishing animation. And there's a lot of writing that goes on with animation or with anything that doesn't necessarily involve world building. I think that's one thing that's really important for your listeners to understand, or anybody who wants to be creative, is finding that job where you're just the guy that comes up with ideas and you get to do the fun stuff. The fun part of creating all the time is as rare as hen's teeth. It just doesn't exist. I mean, if you're the writer, you're going to have to write marketing copy. You're going to have to write, budgets. You're going to have to come up with justifications for why you need to spend $4,000 on a mocap suit. And there's a lot of writing that goes into every aspect of the business. It's not just the fun stuff of writing scripts or, creating characters or describing worlds or things like that.
That's interesting. Like, you could definitely see some things. Do you have is this what you do for a living, or is this like your side stuff? Because you said you did the coding.
Yeah. So the last year, we've actually gotten kind of an infusion of some funds, and currently this is my full-time job. For the first time in my life, I am a full-time writer. But before April 1st of this last year of 2020, I was working in the IT space and have been since I pretty much graduated high school. So there's a long and sordid story there. I can go through all that career history if you want it. But again, all those little side projects, all those little passion projects, all the game development, all of the comics that I wrote in the past, and, the novels that I wrote and the short stories, all that's led to being able to have this kind of breadth of experience to apply to Brainy Pixel and be our chief creative officer. So, wow. And this is Divine Nine. This is another show that actually touches the Weird War universe. If you click on the show more there, the little button under the little monkey guy, you'll see some bad guys, and you'll also see someone who looks familiar. So if you scroll up there's Tenet. So nice. Divine Nine is kind of a Christian Ben 10 meets Avatar: The Last Airbender type show, and it's for kind of the 7 to 10-year-old age bracket. And this is a Christian show as well. Action adventure, world exploration, weird spiritual creatures. There's really, really excited about this show. We're working on getting an intro animated for it currently so we can show to potential investors. But I'm really, really excited about this show. Can't wait to work more on this one.
Yeah, this stuff is really impressive. And
thank you.
Wow. Like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, this looks like a cool show.
Thank you. And of course, Tenet's Tales. So yeah, we talked a ton about Tenet's Tales. And Fourth World 4 is a faith broad show. And faith broad here means essentially it's based on Christian values and morals, but it's not necessarily going to reference scripture or talk about Jesus or talk about salvation or God, because it is sci-fi. And we have aliens, and Jesus didn't die for aliens, right? And we have a kind of we have kind of a theological and doctrinal issue if we start bringing Jesus into sci-fi. It's tough to explain. You can do it, but it's not easy. C.S. Lewis did it, for instance. But our Fourth World 4 show is kind of like a Fantastic Four meets Star Trek Voyager. So wow. 4 scientists who are orbiting Mars get zapped with some cosmic power, and they get transported to the far side of the galaxy, and they get transformed in the process. Their physical forms change. So they start out as human. They kind of wake up as these wild creatures and characters, and then they have to try and figure out how to get back home. And this one's going to be 3D, and you can click on any of these images here. All this is done with the Unreal Engine. And so all these scenes are in the 3D space, and these again are what we call episode stills. And an episode still, if you don't know, is when you're writing a pitch. It's generally a good idea to have a certain number of episodes described when you're pitching the show, so that the potential investor or producer gets an idea of what kind of stories are we going to see. And one of the things that we like to do is we like to include stills, an image with those. And this is actually the actual design of our 4 main characters. The 3D stuff, those are all placeholders. They were just for the pitch only. And these are our actual characters, what they will look like once we design them. And we've not designed those 3D characters yet. We're just beginning that process now. And so we're really excited about this show. My business partner is a huge sci-fi nut, and he can't wait to get into this show. So, but we're working on Cubekins right now.
You what?
We're finishing up our Cubekins pilot right now. As soon as we're done with that, we're jumping into this.
Wow.
And Pick Train is kind of the one that started it all. It's an early education, very young children, and actually English is a second language that we created. This was kind of the one that got us kicked off, and this is out on YouTube now. This actual is very simple. It's like how to count, what are your colors, what are your numbers, how to add, how to subtract. And this was all done in Blender, which is a free 3D program.
Yeah.
But we created 30 plus episodes of this show. It's really short. And we actually wound up selling it to TBN several years ago, which is the largest Christian network on the planet. And they've been running it ever since. And then we've also now got it on, I think, a total of 6 other platforms, streaming platforms. And we just got the contract today to go to another streaming platform for it.
Wow.
So this is a show that works really well for us to kind of open doors and show people what we can do. And again, kind of going back to some points you've made about being creative and kind of completing something, that's key. I mean, that's just key. You gotta get something done so that you can point to that product and say, hey, I did this. It might have been 10 years ago. It might be dated like this show. But it's done. I did it, and I can point to that as proof that I can complete a job. I can do something with, a beginning, middle, and end. It's a finite product. It has a value. That value might be low. It might be high, but I can at least talk about it. I can talk to it. And so I encourage every creative that I encounter to basically create not a project, but a product, take something from conception all the way to finished product, something that you could potentially sell to somebody or at least show to somebody in a portfolio.
Wow. That's really cool. And I definitely can resonate with that sentiment. Something else, it's so funny because I was just thinking that today, I just need to finish more stuff,
Yeah.
I start plenty of stuff. I need to finish more stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes down to, I mean, again, I did this for years on nights and weekends, and I've got 5 kids, and I've got a wife, and I'm active in church, and so it's not like I'm just coming home and, smoking a cigar at the end of the day and like, oh, what am I going to write today? No, it's like, literally snatches of time in between, 4 a.m. and, 4:05 a.m. and things like that. But you have to set a goal. You'll never complete anything until you set a goal, and then you have to measure it. And that's what's really critical, and that a lot of creatives, number one, don't realize, and number two, don't like to do, is if you don't measure it, then you don't know how you're doing, right? And it's just the same like working out. If you're going to work out, you're like, hey, I want to be able to bench press, 1,000 pounds or whatever. That's crazy. You can't do that really, but 1,000 pounds by next January, right? Well, then there's going to have to be a path to get you there. That means, you have to break that goal down into months or weeks or days, and you have to work towards that goal. And doing something creative is no different. And I think that's one of the disconnects that a lot of creatives have, is that they got this idea, and it's a great idea. It's a wonderful thing, and it would be great for people to see it and experience it, have it on their desk or in their library or whatever. But they don't set a goal, and they don't then measure that goal and keep themselves accountable. And that's the only way to get stuff done. You got to do that.
Yeah, totally. Now, do you set deadlines or do you
Mhm.
just stick to a schedule specific?
I do both. Actually, I have a
Okay.
schedule. I have a daily schedule, and um, I'm lucky. I'm blessed, no doubt about it. Since April Fool's Day of this past year, I get to do this every day. I get to wake up and do it, and it's the best job I've ever had. Period, hands down, no argument. But I
April
still have a
Fool's, I had my dream job, but no, it's real.
well, I did actually posted that, so I'm like, the day I'm starting as a writer, and this is not April Fool's joke. Um, but yeah, I have a very strict schedule that I follow, and it's not so strict that I can't, that I can't if I have to go get the oil changed. I can't go do that until Saturday. No, that's only on Saturday. No, I can, I can move things around, but I do have a set schedule, and then I absolutely have goals. And having a business partner helps with that because I can then tell him what my goals are, and he kind of keeps me accountable. It's not that he's my boss; we're equal partners, but it helps to have someone that you can say, oh, I didn't make my 12 pages today or whatever. And, if they're they're a Christian brother, they can then encourage you maybe, or hold you accountable. Like, well, this is the third day you haven't made your goals. So what's up?
Yeah.
Are you watching too much Netflix or what's really going on? You say, no, it's not Netflix. It's, I've been plumbing because my toilet exploded or whatever, who knows what's happening, but yeah, you got to set those goals and you got to have a routine. And even if that routine is, I'm going to write for an hour interrupted. I'm not going to look at Twitter. I'm not going to look at Facebook. I'm not going to watch a video. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to write for an hour. It doesn't have to be, you got to get 100 pages done in that hour. It's just, I spent an entire hour putting words on a page,
Mm-hmm.
And that builds. Jerry Seinfeld, for instance, is the story I love to tell because it kind of changed my perception when I heard about it. If you don't know it, but Jerry Seinfeld is one of the most prolific writers in Hollywood. The guy writes a ton of stuff, right? Ton of shows, not just on his show that he was on, but on other shows as well.
Right.
And he has this thing called "Don't Break the Chain." And essentially, it's you have a calendar on your wall, and you have a goal, and whatever that goal is, can be I'm going to write 1 page a day, right? And then as soon as you do that goal, as soon as you meet that goal, you put a red X on that day on the calendar. And then the next day, if you meet it, you put a red X on the calendar. He said, and you will, once you see all those X's lined up, he said, you will kill yourself not to break the chain, to not have a gap where there's no red X. He's like, it'll drive you crazy. He says, it's the best motivation ever. And so I've tried it, and it does. It works, at least for me. I mean, there may be some people like, I don't care about X's, but for me, I don't. I look at that calendar. I'm like, I am not going to break the chain. I'm going to get that done today. I'm going to make the time.
Calendar tomorrow. Well, that's really cool advice, and I'm curious. Just again, out of curiosity, like, what is
Sure.
what is your current daily routine as far as working on these
Sure.
projects?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I get up and I am not a morning person. This all started April the 1st. So before that, I was like, oh, if I can just sleep till 9 o'clock every day, Lord, please don't let anybody call me. But so I get up at 6 o'clock every morning, and I spend the first thing I do is I read scripture and work out. And I actually like read scripture and I like meditate on that scripture while I'm doing a workout. And then I'll take a shower. Then I'll pray with my wife. And then I go to work. I'll get me a cup of coffee, and then I'll start writing. I'll start writing until essentially about 11 o'clock when I eat lunch. Then at lunch, after I eat lunch, I will then check some social media and do some social media postings. And then the afternoon is usually for meetings, or if I have any sort of office type paperwork, there are contracts that have to be signed or reviewed, or first of the month, I'm sending out, new art direction to new artists, which is kind of writing, but kind of not. It's also kind of some legalese, and it's not fun writing. The art direction part isn't, but all the contracts and dealing with all that, that's not fun writing. That's kind of that work stuff that I said. So I'll do that for a couple, 3 hours after lunch. And then usually the last couple of hours, hour and a half of the day, I try to write a little bit more, and I'll always right to a point where I know exactly what's going to happen next. So I'll quit early in terms of, say if I'm writing a scene in a comic, right? And I know that in my act 2, the last thing that's going to happen in my act 2 is Tennant's going to be hanging over a boiling vat of lava, I'll write up right until that point, but I won't write that scene. Right. So that way, when I get up the next morning, I don't have to wonder about what I'm writing or what I'm going to do. I'm actually ready to write that scene because it's like, I want to see what happens in that scene, and so I'll start out fresh with this kind of charge and like, oh, I got to get this scene written, because I want to see how Tennant gets out of it. And so that really helps a lot as well, to continue to stack up those pages or those words or whatever your goal is, whatever your measurement is.
So if you're writing every day like that, are you going to be able to get all these comics out in your lifetime?
Well, actually, I've got so the Tennant's Tales, the Weird War universe. I've got 75 comics already, kind of broken out for just Tennant, and it spans 6,000 years of history currently. I don't know. It's a good question. That's a lot of comics. So a lot of stories.
To hire some more artists.
Yeah, I would definitely need to hire some more artists. But I write pretty fast, so I can usually churn out, in a given day. I mean, I can write a 10-page comic in a day. Nice. So it might not be ready to send to the artist. It might be a rough draft. Then I need to edit it. Maybe the next day. And that is also something I'll sometimes do in the afternoons after office work. That's also my edit time. I may go in and tune something up, but I always leave stuff alone for a day. So I'll write it, set it aside for a day, write something different, write something else, and then I'll come back on the third day to that thing that I wrote to tune it up. But
so speaking about that, I always like to hear a little bit more about the writing process, which you already delved into a bit, but I'm curious, what kind do you use, outline structures or any kind of story structure, or do you just, some people just kind of write?
So it depends on what I'm writing. If I kind of already know the story, then I know the characters really well in the world, then I can just jump into it. So Tennant's Tales is oftentimes that way. But I have found, since writing became my job, it's actually tougher to pants it, to kind of go by the seat of your pants. And so I read this great book in preparation for going full time because I knew it was coming. And it's called Writing for Animation by Jeffrey Scott, I believe. I can send you the link and we can put it out there for your listeners. But I had never written for animation before. And it was I was a little bit trepidatious about this. I'd written comics, I'd written novels, I'd written novellas and short stories. So I'm comfortable with story and crafting story, but writing for animation is a whole nother thing. And there was something that I read in that book, that what Jeffrey recommends that you do is, once you write your summary for your story, then you do something that he calls writing motivations. And so writing motivations is when you take all the characters that are going to be in that story and you list out by act, what are their primary motivations, right? And so what that then allows you to do is you take that summary, which is a 4,000-foot look at your story from beginning to end, and the middle and the solution to the problem. You got to figure that out. And then you look at those motivations and you go, okay, knowing this, right, what my summary, where my story is going, and knowing what all these people think about it and how they're going to act, I can then outline it really easily, because it's really just a logical progression at that point, So, for instance, if your story is, Superman has to save Lois Lane from Lex Luthor, but Lex Luthor has a kryptonite, pin that he's going to poke Superman with, right? So that's my story. And then our motivations are, Superman's going to save Lois Lane, period. We all know that, right? That's his motivation. He's not going to not do that. Lex Luthor is going to try his best, to thwart Superman, but he's going to be greedy and do it his way. And Lois Lane is, probably going to just scream a lot. So we now have our motivations. And so now it's easy to lay that story out, because I know what everybody's going to do and why. And I kind of know my beginning, middle, and end. So now I can break that document down into an outline. And so I added the outlining part just because for me, it helps me write quicker when I have those specific scenes, even if it's just a couple sentences written down as to kind of what's going to happen in this scene. And I call this document a SMO. It's a summary, motivation, and outline document. So I abbreviate SMO. And once you write that document, it becomes really easy to write fast. And you can pound out a script, you can pound out a comic, you can really pound out a short story or even a novel really, really rapidly. But what's really neat, and only a writer will get this, is your finished product is never what your SMO says it's going to be. It's never what the outline says, because what happens is as you begin writing, things begin to shift a little bit, and maybe something happens a little earlier than you expected, or maybe a little later. You know it's going to happen, but maybe things shift a little bit, or maybe things change just ever so slightly, because we need to amp up tension, or maybe our pacing is a little slow, or something like that. And it's really neat. It's still the same basic story, but it's not the way the SMO said it was going to happen. And it's this really neat thing that as a writer, I kind of geek out on. So, but it's neat to go back and look at those documents. So
that's cool. I'm glad you mentioned that, because, a lot of times the common critique from pantsers is, I don't want to write an outline because I don't want to know the end before I want to figure that out as I'm going. I want the surprises along the way that I get when I'm writing. Well, even when you outline, you kind of pants, and even when you pants, you kind of outline. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you will. I mean, you might know generally how you're going to get to the end of the tale, but you're not going to know specifically. You're still going to be surprised. Yeah. So I encourage pantsers out there to embrace a little outlining. And I think one of the big misnomers is that when people talk about outlining, they think they have to account for every single thing that happens in the story, every single moment. And that's not the case. Keep your outlines broad brush. Yeah. Make sure there's a beginning, middle, and end. Make sure that if it's, at the end of your act 2, you've got a cliffhanger that's going to pull us into act 3. Just make sure those kind of moments are there. And then other than that, keep it broad brush, because you're probably not going to wind up sticking to that outline, and you don't have to. Feel free to let your characters speak to you, and feel free to let the story kind of emerge and kind of grow. And what I call it breathing, because that's really what the story is like. It's like it's breathing. It's breathing in and out, and it's changing just ever so slightly. It's shifting, but overall, it's still the same story. It's just a little bit different how you got there.
Now, is your dialogue complete when you hand the script over to the artist, or do you kind of finish that out after the fact?
So it depends on my artist, actually. If one of the things, like for instance with Mingo, there was a language barrier there, so I actually wrote more dialogue than I probably needed. I was probably more wordy in my dialogue, because I wanted to make sure that he understood kind of the emotional motivations that the characters had, right? So there was even like a little bit of art direction in the dialogue, almost. It was what you would equate it to is kind of like monologuing, right? It would be a little monologue-y, right? The dialogue would. And then when I got it back, when I got the imageries back, I just made sure all that was on a different layer, and then I would go in and tighten that wording up a little bit. Because once you have the pictures there, you're getting 90% of the communication, and so you don't need as many words. You can be a lot more truncated with your dialogue, and that's something as well that when you write for film, you learn that, right? When you're writing for animation, when you're writing for a screen, whether it's feature film or whether it's animation, small screen, or whether it's writing a YouTube script or whatever, dialogue, number one, needs to be tight and short, but also say everything, because typically you don't have the luxury of epilogues, or you don't have the, you aren't able to go back and tell the whole, story from the beginning of time. You got to make all that, succinct in your dialogue. So learning to write really tight, really expressive dialogue that delivers your character's motivation, lets us know what's happening, is something that you learn over time. It's not something you can just pick up. Some people are geniuses at it out of the box. I don't know how they do it. I think there's some sorcery involved, but most people have to work at it. It's just slog through it. So
yeah, totally. There was one time, I've talked about this before on my show, but there was one point where I was like, okay, I've done a couple comics, some mini comics, and little things here and there. All right, now I'm going to really learn how to write. So I'm going to take a month or two and learn how to write, and then we'll have that down.
Right.
And then what I realized through that process was Oh no, this learning how to write thing, that's gonna take the rest of my life. Okay, well,
Yeah, but you can always go back and tune those comics up and then apply what you've learned. And yeah, I mean, that's with any art, right? I mean, the first thing, my son likes blacksmithing, right? And the first thing he made on a forge, is so far removed from the stuff he's making now. Another son I have is a chef, and the first meal he cooked is nowhere near the level of delicacy that the stuff he's making now. So that's just something. And if you're a creative out there, don't let that stop you.
Yeah.
You're going to grow in your craft. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. And don't think that those initial tries were failures, because they're not. Because without those initial tries, you couldn't have gotten to where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
You can't jump from point A to point Q without going through the rest of the alphabet. You got to go through all those trials and tribulations to get there. So it's just part of the
totally.
process.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this too with like I feel like a lot of times, it's just kind of the doing the thing over and over. I definitely feel it with drawing and stuff. Like the more you draw the character, the more you experiment a little bit, or just whatever you're drawing, and you just try a little something new here, and then try something a little bit new there, and eventually that starts to become how you do it, and the things that work you use, and the things that don't work you kind of toss away. And it's interesting how it
it's
grows.
like a jazz musician, right? A great jazz musician knows the basics. He's got them down cold. He doesn't have to do his scales or whatever those things are called, that you play on piano or whatever. He knows all that stuff cold, and now he's able to improvise. He's able to layer on, more skill on top of all those basics. And drawing's the same way. I got a buddy of mine who did some work at Disney, and he was in animation class there, and he said, first day animation class, 60 people walked in, sit down, and the guy that's teaching says, "Okay, everybody got your pencil and paper?" He says, "I want you to draw this circle." He draws this perfect circle on the board. He says, "Draw that circle. Don't stop until I tell you to." 4 hours later, he says, "Okay, now you can stop." And everybody's like, been drawing circles for 4 hours. He said, "Okay, now it's time to go out and get a break, pause, come back in." When they came back in, only 15 people come back into the room. And the teacher says, "Okay, now that we got the quitters out of the way, now I'm going to teach you how to draw Mickey Mouse." And it started with a circle, and they started drawing a circle and then adding 2 more circles for the ears, and building on that. He's like, "But if you're not willing to draw circles until your hand falls off, then you cannot be an animator."
Yeah. That's a great lesson, because I think that's the thing a lot of people who try to get into animation find out is, this isn't that fun. I don't want to draw the same thing slightly different a million
this is
times.
like work. This sucks. Yeah. And writing is the same way. I mean, it's like, I don't want to have to go over this page one more time. And I think I've squeezed every word and I pulled out every preposition that I can, But if you want to be a great writer and you want to learn the craft, you got to pay your dues. There's no shortcuts. So
yeah, totally. And we're gonna close out pretty soon, but I also was curious about you mentioned a few times your business partner. What role does that person play, and are they doing this full time as well? Or I'm just curious.
My business partner, he's our CEO, and he's the guy that has to make everything that I dream up beautiful. So he's an artist. And he's an animator, and he is a technical animation lead. In his day job, he actually gets to do animation. So this is still a nights and weekends kind of gig for him, but hopefully soon it won't be. We're really just waiting on an investor or an executive producer person who's passionate about what we're doing to step in and say, I see you guys are out there, you're paying your dues, you're making this pilot, you're making these shows. I love what you're doing. I want to come and get involved. And as soon as that happens, then Michael, my business partner, hopefully will go full time immediately. And there's some stuff on the horizon where he may go full time anyway, just depending on some things that fall into place. Like I said, we just had a meeting yesterday with a potential really close distribution deal for Cubekins, and we're getting some production funding coming online. So if those things happen, then that plan may accelerate. But the intent was always for both of us to be full time with the business. But it's hard to go sell. It's hard to go sell an idea, and that's probably another great lesson for your listeners. Is you can have an idea on a napkin, and sometimes you can sell that and it'll fly, but most of the times it simply won't. And that's really what we try to do with our website and with our pitch pages that we went over earlier, is that we want to show that we've got a breadth of ideas that really cover the market from, basically a newborn with like a pick train to a Cubekins, 4 to 7, and then a Divine 9, kind of 7 to 10, and then a Fourth World 4, kind of 10 to, 14, and then a Tenant's Tale, kind of 14 and on into, young adulthood, or college age. So we want to show that as a studio, we're well-rounded and we have the ability to produce any of these shows that a producer might want, or an investor might say, I'm interested in that. And it just so happened we kind of rolled the dice and said, we're going to make this Cubekin show because we think it'll be the easiest one to do. And so that's the one we're closing in on having that pilot done for. So
that's really cool. That's totally
thank
awesome.
you.
We don't, we tend to talk to indie comic creators here, and that's part of what you do.
It is.
It's also it's really cool to see. I feel like creators, our power is kind of the fact that we can own IPs and we can put them out there, and a lot of times we don't highlight them in a way that gets the attention that we need. Right. But I think that what you've done with your website and how you've promoted these things is a pretty cool example of where to start. I mean, you've done a lot more than start, but at the same time, maybe something to look towards as what you want to do. Because when it comes down to it, if I didn't know this when I started out being a creator, is when you own an IP, when you own an intellectual property, whatever create character or story you own, you got to think of it as like a pie or something, and you can slice that pie in almost an infinite amount of slices, and those things can become products out there in the world. They can be TV shows, movies, cartoons, whatever. They could be a lot of different things, comics, digital products, apps, there's a million different things that those things can be, and people can either buy the rights to them or you can put them out yourself. And it's pretty cool because the possibilities are endless. The time and effort and money it takes to do these things aren't necessarily endless, but there's a lot of potential there. And I think it's really cool seeing what you've done. You're really trying to kind of maximize on that kind of idea, I think, Yeah,
and I appreciate that. And the challenge here again goes back to, what we were talking about earlier, in that you got to get it done. You got to have something out there to show. And we kind of took I won't say a risk, because I think the risk is minimal, but we discussed early on, hey, do we want to put this stuff out on the web? Do we want to put out, this much information and this much imagery and a log line and our story synopsis and all this stuff? And finally we said, yeah, we do, because we're looking to find the right people that are interested in helping this studio grow into something that makes entertainment, makes products. And that's tough to do when all that information is hidden on a PDF on my hard drive, and it only goes out through maybe, an email that I'm able to send or a tweet that I'm able to send, but when you put it out on the web like that, sure, you might run the risk of somebody knocking you off and spoofing your show or, stealing your IP, but that risk is super low, in my opinion. Yeah. And that comes from creating products, and selling it on the web and creating businesses around that for the last 20 years. I've been doing this a long time, and I've not had that problem so far. So that's a blessing. And I thank God for that blessing. But I want people to see what we're doing and get excited. I want somebody surfing the web, and we just had a guy contact us, and this is a great story I can tell you maybe on a future podcast, the whole tale. But we had a guy who literally did a search for Christian Animation Studio, and we came up, on the top of the page, praise God. And and he clicked on us and was blown away by what we were doing with Cubekins with our motion capture. And he sends us an email just to say, hey, I've been doing this 12 years. This stuff is great. What you guys are doing is amazing. I just want to give you hats off, kudos. And we're like, hey, thank you so much. We get in a conversation. We find out this guy has tons of motion capture equipment and wants to work with us. And by the way, did work on Marvel, on the Avengers, Marvel's Avengers. Nice. And so he's got a pedigree that's like crazy, and he wants to work with us, and he's a believer. Yeah. And so we're like, if we hadn't put it out there, we would have never gotten an email, and so I'm not saying that's the way it's going to work for everybody, but that's the way it's worked for us. So we're pretty pleased. So
that's really neat. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of all this. And once again, let people know where they can find you. I've put the link in the chat many times, and it's also in the description for his website if you want to check it out. And check out Tenet. It's only $1, or I think he even mentioned he might just
pay what you want. Actually, you can pay whatever you want.
There you go.
But yeah, I'm more than happy to give a few copies away to your listeners, Marshall. I'd love to promote it and love to promote your show as well. So you can get us at brainypixel.com. That's BRAINY Pixel PIXEL.com. All of our social media links are on there. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those things. I don't know all of them. So we've got a great social media lady that helps me out with a lot of that stuff. And we're about to start ramping up separate Cubekins presences as well, because that's about to be a big push. So you're going to see a Cubekins Instagram and a Cubekins Twittergram, or whatever those things are called. I don't know. Pinterest. That's what it's called. So yeah.
Sweet. That's awesome.
We're also, just really quick, we're also doing a contest right now. If you follow us on Twitter in the month of October, we're pushing towards 400 followers. If we get to 400, then I'm going to do a drawing, and somebody of all of our followers, not just the last ones that came in, but somebody will get an 18 by 24 poster of a Tenet's Tale cover that is really awesome. So retweet, and the more people that follow us, the more people win. So
that's awesome. I'm putting the Twitter link in the chat right now.
Thank you. Yeah, we're at Brainy Pixel on Twitter. So
cool. Awesome. Well, you guys know where to find me. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out in the chat. I mean, I feel like, if you guys stuck in for a while, I think you got some pretty cool, helpful tips on a lot of different things having to do with expanding your creativity, and also just doing your creativity, finishing things and all that, and writing and good stuff. So thank you so much, Brandon, for coming on. This was a great conversation.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invite. Happy to do it again. Lots more things we can talk about. And I would love to have you on my podcast as soon as it gets up and running. So I'd love to reach out to you and have you on the podcast. So
I'd be happy to come on, and you're definitely welcome to come on some more. So we'll be talking again. So thank you again, and everybody, we will talk to you next time.
Night, everybody.